With so much entertainment available at our fingertips, it's easy to forget how we filled our time before the onset of technology. Of course, many activities such as playing card games or reading books have stood the test of time for hundreds of years. But what about when people had to get a little more creative with their hobbies? Look back to the 1800s, and you'll find an entertainment landscape that could get pretty weird. So what did people in the Victorian era do when they wanted to get a little more creative with their free time? Ladies and gentlemen, this is Historidame, and today, we're learning all about weird things that the Victorians did for fun. One popular activity that could get the whole family outside and enjoying good weather was going for a picnic. Now, on the surface, this is not strange by any means, but what made a Victorian picnic unique is the preference that many people had for doing it in a cemetery. On weekend afternoons, dozens of families could be found strolling through their local grave sites, playing games, engaging in conversation, and of course, enjoying a nice picnic lunch. While in many cultures today doing such things in a cemetery could be considered disrespectful, during the 1800s it was quite the opposite. During Queen Victoria's reign, traditions around mourning were much more extensive than they are today. Families were large and mortality rates were high, which meant that people had a lot of deceased relatives and they spent a lot of time grieving them. Because of this, an outing at a cemetery was a great way to not only spend time with your living family members, but also to honor and remember the deceased. The public's attitudes towards gravesites also shifted during this time, with the prevalence of the rural cemetery movement. In large cities, especially ones like London, conditions could be crowded and filthy, and with many outbreaks of disease, cemeteries filled up quickly, to the point where bodies actually had to be stacked on top of each other in order to fit. This caused major problems when events like storms and flooding could wash the dead right up to your doorstep. In an effort to put a stop to this, the 1830s saw many cemeteries relocated to the outskirts of towns, where they had more land and resources to build a better gravesite. Many of these new cemeteries were built much nicer than their predecessors, with well-manicured gardens that particularly appealed to the upper and middle classes. Add that to the fact that many cities at the time, especially in North America, didn't have public parks yet, and suddenly a cemetery became a very nice place to spend the afternoon. Not only could you get away from the hustle and bustle of the city, but you had a nice place to spend time with nature and converse with others in your community. Picnicking in cemeteries would remain strong throughout the 1800s, but the practice would begin to fall out of fashion sometime during the 1920s, when new advancements in medicine lowered the mortality rate. And with public parks being routinely added into cities, people suddenly had an abundance of other places in which to spend their time. One of the defining features of Victorian-era society was the rapid advancement in science, especially when it came to discovery and exploration. With so much new knowledge to share, the public became increasingly interested in learning about the natural world, and perhaps no hobby shows this off more than the amateur taxidermy fad of the 1800s. For anyone unaware, taxidermy is the process of stuffing and sewing animal skins with the goal of making a lifelike preservation of the creature. In many cases, taxidermy was used as a tool to educate people about the wonders of the natural world, but people would also stuff animals for personal reasons, such as creating a trophy from your latest hunting expedition or preserving your beloved pet. During the height of its popularity, it was common for people to attend exhibitions featuring vast collections of taxidermied animals. In the case of the 1851 London exhibition, people flocked from far and wide to see one of the many exhibits displaying tropical animals, including a full-sized elephant. For some taxidermists, however, the practice was not seen just as an educational tool, but rather as an art form. Herman Ploquet was one such taxidermist who took the preservation of animals to a whole other level. His display at the 1851 exhibition featured various tableaus created from small taxidermied animals, depicting them in human-like scenarios, such as a frog out for a walk with a parasol, or rabbits sitting in a classroom. Other artists like Walter Potter would also be well known for their anthropomorphic taxidermy. Potter would make various displays featuring animals doing human things, and even wearing clothing. My personal favorite is the one of kittens having a tea party, which is honestly quite charming. But he would also go on to create more experimental works, such as this disturbing kitten with 9 legs, so it was kind of a mixed bag. Walter Potter also had a strong belief in using only predeceased animals in his works, which was a sharp contrast to museums at the time, who in order to keep up with demand, would send expedition teams around the world to acquire animals for their displays. Though this kind of artwork might not appeal to everyone's taste, you cannot deny it is certainly interesting to look at. And I think if I lived in the Victorian era, I wouldn't mind taking a trip to see the taxidermy displays. Though greeting cards are a common item among the holidays for many people, they were all the rage in the Victorian era. In the mid-1800s, the British Postal Service was reworked so that sending mail was much more affordable for the average citizen, thus allowing the holiday card to take off. While the act of sending or receiving a card is still quite normal, the Victorians took this to the extreme. It was not uncommon to receive a card in the mail for birthdays and Christmas, but also Halloween, Valentine's, and to express a variety of other sentiments, such as your classic get well soon. But what made Victorian postcards so interesting is the strange and somewhat unsettling imagery that they used. It was common for card designs of the time to feature macabre illustration, jokes, or dark humor, and sometimes they were just plain weird. Take for instance this Christmas card featuring a man that has the body of a root vegetable, this frog dancing with a beetle in the moonlight, or these children being kidnapped by Demon Santa. And of course, nothing says getting into the holiday spirit quite like a strange snow goblin waiting around the corner to beat a man with a club. But Christmas wasn't the only time that you would be getting a weird card in the mail. Halloween was also a common holiday for people to send postcards, and Valentine's Day, though it still involved your typical cards filled with romantic sentiment, also included the anti-Valentine. These were cards that instead of sending to your love interest, you would send to someone that you disliked in order to insult them. These cards were often sent anonymously, and could include illustrations, rude poems, and jokes at the expense of the recipient. During the women's suffrage movement in particular, many of these cards were made to target suffragettes, which really goes to show you, people were still getting anonymous hate messages far before the onset of the internet. A collector's culture also arose around many types of postcards, with people saving them in scrapbooks or boxes as part of their hobby. Honestly, I think it's pretty cool, and I would collect some of these today. Now, when you live in a time before the age of film, people had nowhere near as much available to them when it came to shocking forms of entertainment. Attending theater shows was of course the next best thing, but this was not always attainable for the average citizen. Many members of the working classes would have to rely on things that they could afford, like traveling fairs and smaller shows, and there was one type in particular that is arguably the most notorious of the century. As more people in the general population began to learn about the sciences, public interest only grew. And what better way to get your fix of shocking entertainment and scientific oddity than going to see a freak show? Though freak shows did not originate in the Victorian era, the growing public interest in science caused them to reach their peak of popularity during this time. This was a type of traveling show that was a display of individuals exhibiting physical abnormalities, where people could pay to come and gawk at them like a museum exhibit. Walking through a freak show, one could expect to see any number of rare conditions, like conjoined twins, giants, or people with albinism. There were also performers such as magicians or fire eaters, and of course the showman, who would lead the entertainment and dazzle guests with tales of his performers. Now of course, you can't exactly talk about freak shows without mentioning the fact that they were, at their core, exploitative. After all, paying money to point and laugh at the expense of real people doesn't look great, and it definitely doesn't help that in some cases performers could be abused by their showman, forced to work long hours with minimal pay. On the other hand, however, for many of these people this was the only way that they could make a living, and if they had a particularly rare condition, they had a lot more sway in negotiating the terms of their employment. Luckily, our attitudes towards people with disabilities have changed drastically since then, and I think that we can all agree that this is one form of entertainment that definitely shouldn't make a comeback. Hey everyone, thank you for watching! If you enjoyed the video, please consider leaving a like or a comment down below. If you want to see more content like this, you can also subscribe to my channel, and keep up to date on all the fun history videos of the future. But for now, I bid you farewell.